We are back. Well, most of us are back. I'm Ralph Tyko. It is the Golenbock University show, and Peter has yet to join us. Our guest this evening, we were going to make it 3 baseball Michiganers, but it's going to have to be just the 2 for a while. A member of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, I'm proud to say, and an esteemed author and now podcaster, David Nemec. How are you, sir?
Once again, it's a pleasure to be with you, Ralph, and I'm looking forward to it.
Pleasure to have you. We are going to talk tonight about Curt Flood. It was his birthday this last week, and I posted his picture on my website with kind of a reminder that there aren't very many players that shouldn't be lining up at his gravesite to wish him a happy birthday with flowers and what have you. You want to elaborate on that, David? I know it's one of your favorite topics.
It is. Flood, you're right about every current player should, actually make a donation every year to old-time players or, fund for players of Flood's era that never got quite what they deserved in pension plans or whatever. Because if anybody changed the game really dramatically, it was Curt Flood when he refused to be traded by the Cardinals to the Phillies and really set baseball on its rear end. And they've been recovering from it ever since. The powers
he
that be.
never benefited. What ended up happening was absolute free agency, and he himself never benefited one dime.
No, he didn't. It was really sad what happened because he was only, he just finished, he was 31 years old when he finished the 69 season with the Cardinals. And he had a pretty good year. Nobody's going to make the case that Flood was one of the all-time great players, but he was a good ball player, solid.
Good, solid ball player.
Yeah, a guy you wanted to have on your team, would be a hopeful player. And then the Cardinals, wanted to deal him, and he refused to go. He didn't want to leave a winning team, which he had every promise of going into the 70s as being at least a contender. And he just didn't want to regard himself as a chattel. And he felt that he'd earned the right to go where he wanted to go and be able to dictate his terms if need be. And Major League Baseball, the owners and commissioner and all the powers that were in charge at the time did not agree with him. And Flood was more or less pushed to the sideline for a full season, came back in 71 with the old Washington Senators and played a total of about 10 games or so, and really didn't have it anymore. I don't know what he'd been doing during the time he was off, but he hadn't really kept in the best of shape. I think his heart was no longer in the game. So he retired from baseball and became a painter, and, the baseball has been all the better for it ever since.
Very talented man, died early, tragically. He was...
only 59, I think.
Yeah, something like that. And an excellent painter. I admire people. We're talking off air that John DeQuisto has joined the network, an old friend of mine and a guest many times. He's going to, he debuted his own podcast today. My point is, he himself is a talented artist as well as having the skills to be a fine Major League Baseball player. My God, to be that skilled and one, if not two, of...
I didn't realize that, Ralph.
Two things. It was sad for Curt Flood. want to talk about the Cardinals of those days. Everybody seems to think that integration when Jackie finally reached the majors in 47, everything was peachy keen for blacks coming up. Talk about the Cardinals in particular, because they trained in St. Petersburg, Florida, where Mr. Golenbock lives, as a matter of fact. And it's changed an awful lot, I know, but back in up till the 60s, give us, David, some idea what Cardinal players had to go through in spring training, players of color.
Well, the Cardinals weren't heavy on integration. They started to get a trickle of players in the 50s, but it wasn't really until the 60s, Ralph, that they started to put together a formidable group of black players, along with other National League teams. At the end of the 50s, the National League got a real jump on the American League because they were going after black talent, and they were signing it, and they, as a result, the National League was a stronger league in the early 60s, and the Cardinals were certainly part of it. They traded for Lou Brock, and they had Brock and Flood. They had Bob Gibson, who was probably the most dominant pitcher in Major League Baseball in the late 60s, and those three alone, and they did have other additions too, but they really had a triad of great black players, and but in the 50s they weren't really keen on integration, and black players going to St. Pete were by and large training in a city that was still very segregated. I'm sure they were staying at separate facilities. Right. I don't think they were bringing their wives and families with them, unlike some other players of that time. Right. It was a challenge, and guys like Brooks Lawrence and George Crowe, an old Negro League player who came up rather late in life. He was in his 30s by the time he finally made it in the majors. They were some of the early Cardinal black players, and Tom Alston was another one.
Crowe went on to Cincinnati. He was a terrific pinch hitter.
He was. He had power, but he wore glasses, and wearing glasses was still a stigma in the 1950s, and particularly for a black player, because it was automatically assumed if you were wearing glasses that you were older than you purported to be. And in Crowe's case, it was true. He was old. He was fairly old for, right. When he finally came up. But for a lot of other black players, it certainly wasn't true. But now it's very, very there are very few players who wear glasses on the field. Most of them wear contacts. Crowe was one who wore glasses, and he really had terrific power and was an excellent pinch hitter.
And he had some great years in the Negro Leagues. He came out of the Negro Leagues.
He did.
George Crowe and
another guy was Bob Thurman, who also was a terrific pinch hitter. Another black player came up with the Reds. He and Crowe were kind of pinch hit tandem at at one juncture, and they were very, very good. But the Cardinals really were by and large, for the most part, a white team throughout the 50s. But by the 60s, they were starting to integrate, and they had a lot of good players, a lot of good black players, and that's continued to this day.
Can you speak to the reputation of Enos Slaughter a little bit? In terms of race, he was reputed to not have gotten along with Jackie Robinson, to say the least. Teams like St. Louis and Philadelphia were really hard on Jackie when he first came up.
Yeah, Slaughter was a Southern boy, and Slaughter was a pretty crusty guy. He was not, he wasn't the easiest teammate to be, to have on your club. He was a good ball player, a good solid ball player, but do I think he's a Hall of Famer? I don't. I really don't.
I was going to ask that.
Longevity was an important part. He played into his 40s, and he ended up his career, on a lot of good Yankees teams. And
helping the Yankees quite a bit, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, he did, and that I think is what put him over the top and got him in the Hall of Fame. If you just looked at his Cardinals career, and he also had, some time with the Kansas City A's, he wasn't going to get in the Hall of Fame just on those credentials alone. But the Yankee years, I think, pushed him over because he met, he met a lot of guys through his connections with the Yankees, and a lot of guys were on the Old Timers Committee, and they put him over the top, got him in the Hall of Fame, I think.
Right. A lot of the voters were Eastern voters too that would have ignored him if all that was on his resume was St. Louis.
Yeah, he had some good years. He was a good solid player, but he was never the best player.
He was remembered for the Johnny Pesky, I don't even think Johnny Pesky was in the game that with Boston when he came around to score.
Yeah, he was. Pesky was playing short. Took the relay, I believe, from Leon Culberson.
Dom DiMaggio.
I think if I'm not mistaken, DiMaggio got hurt, and they had to pull him out of the game. And Leon Culberson
and Charlie Cobrell Corbell something was playing center field.
Leon Culberson.
Okay. All right.
And,
his kid played in the majors, incidentally. Culberson. I got to sign him to his Topps contract as the Topps rep back in the day.
Oh, you did?
One of my small claims to fame. Very small, as a matter of fact. Fame and all kinds of stuff. But, here we are.
But you're right about that. You recall something that I had neglected to mention. That play really was very instrumental, I think, in Slaughter making the Hall of Fame, because it's scoring from first. It could have been a double. I mean, it was a tweener hit by Harry Walker, and they ended up crediting him as a single, and Slaughter came around all the way from first base and scored on it. Purportedly because Pesky hesitated when he got the relay throw, not thinking Slaughter was going to try for home, and was actually looking toward, first base to make sure Walker wasn't going to try for second. I don't know. There's the footage of the game. There is a little bit of it, but it's very unrevealing.
If that play happened today, they would have had 74 instant replays from every angle. They would have had X-rays of his internal organs as he crossed the plate.
It's amazing.
That's what it's going to come to very shortly. I know you'll agree sometimes that one picture is worth 1,000 words. And there was a picture on Facebook not too long ago of some ex-Yankees. I guess it was on the Fritz Peterson site. He has amazing pictures of not just the superstars, everybody who ever played. You could have played one game for the Yankees, and Fritz will give you an entire outlay of pictures and biographies. He has an amazing site. But there was a picture of Slaughter and a number of Yankees in circa 57, or I think he was with them twice. And one of the Yankees, is probably a little earlier, because it was Harry Suitcase Simpson.
Yeah.
4 or 5 guys standing around, and Slaughter's arm is, how players pose, sometimes they'll put their arm around, touch the other player, whatever. He had his arm around Simpson in such a nice, natural, fatherly way, and the look on both their faces was so congenial that that's going to stick in my mind for the rest of my life when I think of him with race relations.
Wow. I haven't seen that picture. I wish I'm going to look it up.
I'm going to try to get it and find it for you, or look it up. It's certainly on Fritz Peterson's photos. There are many of them, but it was within the last month or so, and it really gives you. I mean, to me, it just said there's more to this guy, and sometimes people do change. The country people, born.
Yeah. Well, hey, baseball was firmly integrated by the mid '50s, and if I'm not mistaken, Slaughter would have probably, that picture would have been circa 1957, because I think Simpson came to the A's, from the A's to the Yankees in '57, and Slaughter, I think, came back to the Yankees too. And that was probably, was it a team picture, a team photo, or?
It wasn't a team picture, but it was just four or five guys. I can't even remember the other three because they were either they're probably superstars or whatever, but it was just these two, Simpson or Slaughter and then Simpson on the right part of the picture. Just their looks, like Slaughter's look, he was totally comfortable with his arm around. You could just see it in the picture. If you looked at enough faces, looked at enough poses, you could see it. And it just, he had a look at ease that you wouldn't expect Enos Slaughter to have with his arm around a black person or a black person in the same room.
So you have to remember, by that time Slaughter was in his 40s. He's back with the Yankees. He's ecstatic. He's ecstatic. I think that all that plays a part when you get on a team like that. Late in your career, everything changed.
I want everybody to see it. Because it went into my overall judgment of the guy that, not that couldn't have been a pose, good old boy pose. But I like to think differently. I don't know why. Because he wore number 17, and I can remember that. I guess that's why.
Well, I did see him play. I saw him play a number of times, both in the American League and the National League. I saw him once with the Cardinals in a game at Pittsburgh. And then, of course, when he joined the Yankees, I was living in Cleveland, and I saw him come in a number of times and play against the Indians. And he was a fun ball player because he hustled. I mean, he could have been the first Charlie Hustle if somebody had thought to give him that. But Enos Hustle doesn't quite sound the same. But
no. It isn't a name that would it's not like, hey, Mickey Mantle. Ted Savage. That was the best baseball name I ever heard.
It was a good name. Yeah.
He was an outfielder with the Phillies.
Cleveland had a pitcher named Jake Stryker, who it was anything but. He didn't have good control and was not a strikeout pitcher, and he only lasted a couple parts of a couple seasons. But that was a great baseball name too.
Hey, we're not coming quite to the end, but I just want to say that another one of the baseball Michiganers we expected not to be here tonight, Alan Blumkin, a regular on Golenbock University, is involved in some sort of football ritual that he has with friends, either a draft or there's something going on with the playoffs.
Well, he's got the Pittsburgh Steelers playing against the Patriots right as we speak. Al is a big Pittsburgh fan in every sport.
When you mentioned Pittsburgh a second ago, that's exact. You were talking about seeing Enos Slaughter playing Pittsburgh. Alan came to mind because he is he went to the University of Pittsburgh, and he just loves his Pirates. and that is cool beans as far as I'm concerned. Anybody who has a passion for a team or a player.
Yeah, no, he does.
It doesn't even a passion in life. You got to have something. I can't imagine what it would be like for me without sports, baseball in particular, but all sports. And Alan is heavily involved with the network in a show that we have going. You and I talked about it off the air a little bit with Hal Bach. It's a kind of talking hoops from the old garden on 48th Street, Nedick's and the old garden. And once a week we talk some hoops from the 50s, and we enjoy doing that. So Alan has been my, what I call, all reliable. I've said this many times. He's Tommy Heinrich of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And,
very, very good at analogy.
Let me mention the show that he has with you. He has a weekly. You and he have a weekly podcast on the network, and I'm very proud of it. It is David Nemec's Old Time Baseball and Trivia. And tell me about some of the books that you wrote that you're most obviously you wrote the one history of old-time baseball players that you're proud of, but not so much proud of that you enjoyed writing more than some of the others.
Well, the two books that come to mind that were really, really favorites of mine to work on, research, and finally put together were the history of the Old American Association when it was a major league from 1882 through 91. It was called the Beer and Whiskey League. That was its nickname, and that's the name of my book. And that came out in, I believe, 94, and it was really fun to research. And the research led me to think about doing a historical baseball novel just on the 1884 season alone. And after I finished the Beer and Whiskey League, I sat down with the novel, and it came out pretty well. It's called Early Dreams. It was published about 2005, and turned out very well. And those are two of the books I'm really the proudest of. But I think the book that you're probably referring to is the Great Encyclopedia of 19th Century Major League Baseball, which was really a labor of love because I learned so much about the game that I hadn't known. I had to go back and research players and teams that had been flown way under the radar, way under even my radar, and I thought I was pretty knowledgeable about the 19th century game. But once I started digging into some of these early teams, like the Wilmington Quicksteps, which were part of the Union Association in 1884, I realized every time I turned the page and came upon a new player or a new incident, how little I actually knew about the 19th century, because it was so much fun. I would love nothing better than to go to a game in the 1884 season in all three major leagues that existed that year. Just one game. I'd really be happy. I'd be happy as a clam for years and years to come. But
David, do you play computer simulation, baseball computer games simulation?
Yeah, I do. Sometimes I get to be fanatical. Other times I kind of stay away from it for a while, but I do play them. And I really like games that feature the 19th century. I play I'm in a ball era league
that has everything. It's called Baseball Mogul. Is that the one? Mogul?
No, I don't. That's one I'm not familiar with. Do you know what engine they use?
I will send you a link to it, and
okay.
You can just plug in any team from any part. I don't know if they go back into the 1800s or not, but I know any team in the 1900s for certain, and they'll play games based on statistics, and they'll do all the scorekeeping and keeping of the records and give you, you set the lineups, you set the pinch hitters, all that stuff. It's terrific. For me, the old time. So when I was growing up, the 50s and 60s, I play the best teams of each franchise against each other, like the 58 Braves, arguably the best, my favorite at least, against maybe the 64 Cardinals and the 64 Phillies in that league, and the 54 Giants and all that stuff in the 50s.
Did you ever play the Ethan Allen game? You spin the dial. Wasn't that a game?
That was a game.
Yeah, it was.
That was a game. You'd hold those cards in your little kid's hand, right?
You got Babe Ruth, you got Tyko. Yeah.
Right, and you set your lineup, and you set your
order.
Go through the cards, and you'd hold the cards like you were a manager, and you just it's a wonderful game. And
the one weakness it had, and it really killed me because I couldn't find. I tried to figure out a way to work around it, but there wasn't a way, because you had the hitters, you put their card in, you spun the dial, but the pitchers were never a factor. You never,
not. Yeah,
there was no Walter Johnson, no Christy Mathewson, there was no, let alone Bob Gibson or Hal Newhouser or Feller. It was so you only had the hitters. And, you had guys like, Charlie Gehringer who, get a lot of doubles and, it was a fun game.
The cards were put together in, for the odds. I mean, they'd have a certain space and the odds and probabilities. You'd see a Babe Ruth card and it would have home runs cover half of it, and strikeouts cover the other half.
Yeah. The guy who invented the game was a former major league player, Ethan Allen. Was a very good outfielder in the 30s with the Reds, and I don't know whatever possessed him to think of the game or how, but he did make a fair amount of money on it, but not nearly as much as he would if he invented a game like that now. But it was and I didn't realize he was a former major league player when I first got the game as a kid. Because I was thinking of Green Mountain Boy.
Sure I heard that.
Why is the game called Ethan Allen's baseball game? This guy's a Green Mountain Boy from the Revolutionary War. And then, of course, I learned that there was an Ethan Allen who played Major League Baseball in the 30s and was a very good outfielder. And he was the one who was responsible for the game.
Right, and that instilled the passion, and it instilled a certain idea of being able to differentiate the skills of ball player, be able to. You mentioned a Gehringer. Hey, that guy he hit 323 lifetime or whatever, and it did. The card did reflect the amount of doubles and what have you.
Yeah.
Remember Ty Cobb card being a terrific card.
A lot of base hits, a lot of doubles, a lot of triples, a few home runs.
Ed Williams would combine power with batting average.
A lot of walks, yeah. That game was so much fun.
For Williams hitting. Williams was an amazing hitter for his time.
He was.
Did you ever meet a player or an executive in baseball or something that just absolutely frickin' awed you?
Well, I did.
You know what I mean?
Well,
where you go,
when I was a kid, and I was in the 12 and 13-year-old Junior Olympics, and my Junior Olympics coach was a guy who was up for the Hall of Fame this year, George Steinbrenner, and he was from my hometown. And George Steinbrenner, all in all, when I look back at, as a kid and as an athlete, George Steinbrenner was the only coach I had who really taught skills. He taught me how to high jump. He taught me how to get off the starting blocks on the 50-yard dash faster. He taught me he really helped me work on the softball throw. He was a fine coach. He coached college football, both at Ohio State and Purdue. and he was involved with the Cleveland Pipers basketball team in the old ABA. George Steinbrenner was an excellent influence on young kids in my day. And if he'd bought the Cleveland Indians instead of the New York Yankees, the entire history of baseball would have been changed. Because I even though a lot of things he did were not particularly admirable, and he's going to have a tough time getting in the Hall of Fame, I think. All in all, he really was a major influence on me, a major positive influence as a kid.
Nice to hear. Don't hear many really good things. There were some things about him, as Peter Golenbock likes to talk about George Steinbrenner, that were less than, how can we say, complimentary that over his lifetime.
He got into New York. He got into, he wasn't a big city guy. He was from a small town. He was a suburb of Cleveland. His father was, in the shipping magnate in the Great Lakes. He inherited the family business and could have stayed in it and led a very comfortable life. But Steinbrenner was determined to, make a go of it in professional sports. And once he found the Yankees connection, that was it. He was set for life and stayed there. But if he'd owned another major league team beside the Yankees, and he didn't have the kind of pressure that he faced in New York, I think he would have been a very different guy, and we'd remember him very differently today.
Right. Generally we talk baseball, but you're mentioning Cleveland. I got to ask you about a Jimmy Brown story.
Oh, Jimmy Brown was fantastic, and he was a nice guy. All reports to the contrary. He did have some trouble with women. There's no question about it. But all in all, I remember going to Browns games in the early '60s. A lot of Browns games because they still had a good team then. They were a contender almost every year. And after the game, Cleveland Stadium, I don't know what it's like now to go to a pro football game. It's been years. But after the games in Cleveland Stadium, the way the stadium was laid out, the players had a pretty healthy walk to get from the playing field to their dressing room. And, we used to go down and hang out and talk to the players after the game. And Brown was always a very cordial guy and a very knowledgeable guy. And I'm sure you remember this, but probably his best sport was not football; it was lacrosse. Absolutely, he was one of the greatest lacrosse players ever. Even if he never played it down in football, he'd be remembered today as a fantastic athlete. And it was really a coup when Cleveland got him draft choice, and it was just a tragedy that they could never pair him with Ernie Davis, who was his counter.
Just going to ask you that because
it was sad.
Syracuse as well, and he developed leukemia. And,
before he never played it down in pro football. And the Browns traded Bobby Mitchell, Leroy Bolden, and Mitchell was a Hall of Fame player.
Mitchell was excellent. Yes,
an excellent back. Yeah, and the Browns traded
for that draft choice. Is that the idea?
They got Davis. They got Davis in return for Mitchell because Washington, I think maybe Washington drafted first and took him, and then they traded him to Cleveland for Mitchell, and they could pair him with Cleveland wanted to pair him with Brown. And it would have been they would have been the dynasty in the '60s rather than Green Bay. Because Brown and Davis would have been.
Milt Plum was the quarterback for most of it. Am I correct?
He was, and he was not.
Was he a weakness? Was he? Could have they been better? I mean, they were quite good. They won. They beat the Giants in the championship game one year.
They won. They won the last championship came in '64. By that time, they dumped Plum. And they'd also gotten rid of Jim Nanowski, who replaced Plum for a while, and they got Frank Ryan, who was a competent quarterback and a good quarterback at times, but he wasn't Otto Graham, and he wasn't one of the top NFL quarterbacks, but he was a good enough with Jim Brown and Gary Collins, an outstanding receiver who gets little credit today, but is kind of forgotten. He was also a great punter. Brown, Collins, and they had a couple of other guys too, and they had a good Dick Shafrath.
Oh, you had Lou Groza.
Houston, they had a good defensive team. Yeah.
Lou Groza was your tackle.
Groza lasted forever. It seemed like he never was going to retire.
Yes. Quite the day. Cleveland.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And Jim Brown retired on his own terms. Very few guys in professional sports do that and never look back. He never looked back. Never put the uniform on again. Never played another down. Never even thought about it. He gave it serious thought.
He had a very good movie career for a while there.
He did. He had all in all, a very good acting career. All considered, he's had and he's still very much a part of Cleveland sports. He's legend in all, for all teams, all Cleveland teams. When Jim Brown goes to a game, he's always featured. He's gone to Indians games, he's gone to Cavs games. He and LeBron James have a pretty good friendship going.
David, as a kid, I was growing up, and I lived in Queens, and I found out that Sam Huff lived in Queens. So I called information. Sure enough, he had a listed number, and I called him up as a 10-year-old kid.
You could do that then. You could do it.
Do that, right? And he goes, "Sure, I'll talk to you." Good old Southern guy, gentle as hell off the field. And I'm going, this can't be the same Sam Huff, the violent world. And it turned out it was.
Yeah.
And there, Sam Huff and Jim Brown had this incredible, the Giants and Cleveland had this incredible rivalry. And it was all based on containing Brown. And Sam Huff, I think, got his reputation. He wasn't that great, but against Brown, he was terrific. And I think there were other middle linebackers. Schmidt was
Joe Schmidt, Ray Nitschke, and Dick Butkus. They had some real tough hombres.
But Huff was good and great, but he. Against Brown, I mean, it just was a different game.
There was one game, Ralph. I think it was in '58. It was they tied for the title. They tied for the division, and they had a playoff game. It was in New York, and Brown took a tremendous beating in that game, and the Browns were beaten up badly. And they came into the game they lost the last regular season game when Summerall kicked that 50-yard field goal, and then the Giants won the playoff game and went into the immortal game with the Baltimore Colts, the first overtime game.
I think
that could have been Cleveland's game.
56, but it could have been 58. You're right. It was 58.
58. Yeah.
Yes.
But they beat up Brown badly in that game. By the end of the game, Brown used to delight in getting tackled by somebody like Huff or Andy Robustelli or somebody early in the game, and going down and being seemingly hit so hard that he wasn't going to be a factor in the next 10 or 15 plays, and then they'd give him the ball the next down, and he'd spin off 50 yards before they laid a hand on him. But by 58, other teams had already caught on to that little ploy he had of seemingly being, gravely injured, and then, stepping up the next play and taking it all the way. But the Browns and Giants had some great games once Brown joined the team, and I was fortunate enough to see a few of them. Yeah.
Were you? I'm not trying to date you or anything, but when I was a kid, I went to a show. was one of the early card shows where Macy's department store brought in all kinds of old football players. One of them was Marion Motley.
Oh boy, yeah.
Did you know it? Did you watch him, or
Did you tell me anything about him? I did. Marion, in the early days of pro football, when Motley came in 46, he and Bill Willis were two black players. They integrated the All-American Conference. The Browns were the only team, I think, in the first year. Well, they had black players. In the second year, then Buddy Young joined the New York Yankees. Buddy Young was, I think, Illinois, from the University of Illinois. He was a small, elusive running back, and very, 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 very quick. And but Motley, in the first years of pro football, and guys played both ways. You could win a bundle if you walk into a bar and say, who led the Browns in interceptions in 1946, their very first year? And no, it was Otto Graham. Otto Graham played defensive back, and but Motley played linebacker. Motley might have led the team in tackles for all I know. They didn't keep track of that kind of stuff then. But Motley was a very, very tough linebacker, and those guys played. They didn't play 60 minutes, but they would play between 45 and 55 minutes, depending on the game. If it was a close game, they'd be in there for most of the way.
I think the last person to do that with great success was Chuck Bednarik.
Yeah, he's one of a kind of real throwback guy.
Right.
And
who
boy,
was a kind of a guest counselor at a summer camp that I went to each year. And he'd come up a couple of times a year with his brother Tank, I think was his brother's nickname. And they'd give football clinics and sit and chat with the kids and hang. He was a wonderful man, a gentle guy who did not take glee in hurting Frank Gifford. The play was
it was a clean play. It was a clean play.
It was a clean play, and he stood over him, but it was not because he was happy that Frank was hurt. It's because he was a team player and happy that the play helped Philadelphia. It was clean all the way. So, hey, David, this is terrific. The teacher, the professor, isn't here tonight. It would have been interesting to have you and he talk about George Steinbrenner.
Yeah, I would have enjoyed that too.
And you'll come back another time, and
definitely,
and that'll happen. But we kind of rolled with the punch without the big star, and without Alan too, who's what a maven. You've known him for years.
I have going back. 91.
Tell me something I don't know about Alan Blumkin and his baseball knowledge. What, either with Saber or whatever. This guy,
Alan,
he's
very
like
first
Rain Man, and you're the same way, really. But,
yeah, he and I came to the first convention I went to was I think 91 in New York, and he was on an opposing trivia team. And there was a key question. These questions were asked orally, and you rang a buzzer, and you buzzed, and if you buzzed in first, then you froze out everybody else. And there was a question on Dick Donovan, and I buzzed in just a fraction of a second before Al did. And we became friends ever after that. Because he said afterward, he talked to me and said, I just missed it. I just missed it because I was right there with you, and my finger was just of a second behind you. So we became good friends right after that. We were on, we shared a room at some conventions, and, we'd go back and forth. The formal trivia sessions were actually much more fun sometimes than the actual contest, because we really go back and we really ask some, very, very, elaborately designed questions. And they were really, we had a great time in some of those, sessions. We'd stay up half the night asking them. Yeah.
It's amazing how friendships are formed in life.
Al, I don't know if you know that Al is a tremendous history buff too, along with being a sports buff. Al is a really voracious reader. He puts the rest of us to shame. He probably finishes. I would say I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that he reads between 4 and 6 books a week, and I don't know that he keeps all the books that he reads, but if he did, I don't think there'd be much room in his apartment for anything else. But,
my God.
Yeah,
4 to 6 books a week now.
I think so. Yeah, and they're not light reading. He might read, a book on the Civil War, or he might, he's got very eclectic tastes. Sports is just a part of his life. It's an important part, and and it's one that he'd never give up. But he's got other interests too that make him a very interesting dinner companion.
As do you. If it weren't for, say, baseball or baseball trivia, writing about that, what would be your passion? And maybe you could have more than one passion. What are some of your other passions, David?
True crime. I've written a couple of true crime books and edited a couple of true crime books. And I grew up in Bay Village, Ohio, where one of the most famous murder cases in the 20th century occurred on 4th of July in 1954, Sam Shepard case. And
I'm reading about that. I was too young to know.
Yeah. It's a forgotten case today, Ralph, but at the time it was a landmark case. It forced a number of changes to be made in the way crime was reported in the newspapers. Now, of course, no matter how egregious the crime is and how obviously guilty the person might be who's arrested, he or she is always referred to as the alleged or the suspected. Never the killer is finally arrested. Even in these horrible mass
but it
shootings.
means a lot in the juror's mind.
Yes, it does. But this emanates from the Sam Shepard case, because the Cleveland Press crucified Sam Shepard before he was arrested. And headlines in the press when he was finally arrested were, "Police finally wake up and arrest wife killer." That was the kind of headline that the Cleveland Press put out. So it was almost impossible to find an unbiased jury or a jury that didn't know about the case, because it was headlines for weeks every day. And his trial was a joke, because there was no conclusive evidence against him, and he was really convicted of adultery more than murder. And that's what he ended up. The jury ended up, and they were polled afterward. They talked about it. This is what finally decided us that he was guilty of, he was having this affair with his technician. And, a decent law-abiding citizen wouldn't be doing that. And, Shepard, I don't think he was guilty. I knew him. He was my family doctor for a while. He was a football team doctor. Yeah, and he was a very, very interesting guy. And he was the kind of guy, he had a basketball backboard in his driveway. And we would go over there and we'd play hoops with him. He was, he was a young doctor. He was an osteopath, a really top-notch surgeon in northeastern Ohio. And his career was everything was over in his life by the time he was 30. Even though he eventually got out of prison, he was found not guilty at a second trial, and was released from prison. His life was over. He was never the same, and he died very, very young, very tragic death.
Did he practice medicine after coming out of?
He did. His license was restored, and as you can imagine, if you want to find a target for a malpractice suit, you pick on somebody like Sam Shepard. So anything that he did that ended up with a bad result automatically brought a malpractice suit against him. And after he got socked with a couple of these,
I'm sure they didn't have malpractice insurance like they have.
And he was also he wasn't part of the AMA. He was an osteopath, and they didn't get the same kind of treatment. that the AMA didn't really come to his support very much, and he gave up medicine and went into a second career as a professional wrestler, and that's where he was at the time when he died. A very bizarre death, and very suspicious death. I think he was only about 39 or 40 years old at the time. But so that got me into true crime, because I knew this. I didn't like what I saw even as a kid at his trial, the way it was being handled, and I started going back over other old cases like the Lindbergh kidnapping and stuff like that, and I was realizing these guys weren't necessarily guilty who were convicted, and they were hung and whatever. And it drove me back into the Lincoln assassination and other presidential assassinations, and it really. And I've written a number of novels that center more on crime than they do on anything to do with sports. But yeah, true crime would have been.
You must have gotten into the O.J. trial.
I did. I was riveted.
Okay.
I did.
Yeah.
Remember the chase, the night of the chase, the 15-mile-an-hour chase through the streets of.
If the glove don't fit, and
oh boy, yeah. And Mark Furman. Oh boy.
But
yeah, it was. You couldn't make up a case like that. You could not. If it were, it really was. It was too much.
And people ask me, well, he got off, and it's so horrible that he got off. You know what? I think overall it changed the way certainly the L.A. Police Department did business.
It did.
So he might have gotten off, but I would venture to say that it made that department, you call them what you want, that precinct department or whatever, more cognizant about how they collected evidence, and a bunch of folks were affected positively by that down the line.
I think so. Yeah, it did. It did have a positive effect, although it was hard to see it at the time. In the long run, I think it did. And
it got us confused, because he was benefiting from from what you would ordinarily call white privilege. Remember, these cops loved him at the beginning. They did. To arrest him.
And he was a tremendously popular athlete, and he had an acting career too going. And he was some of those. What were they?
The sportscasting thing.
Stuff. I don't know what those crazy movies.
Commercials. He had commercials going, and
he had everything going, and and he'd had a great professional football career and a great college career. He never played in the Super Bowl, but he had some great years with the Bills, and he was he had really had a great life ahead of him if it weren't for that terrible thing that happened. But
can't all be perfect.
No.
But he suffers greatly. I mean, now he's in jail for the rest of his life. He's living on prison food. He's got bad knees. He can't walk. He can't get medical treatment. Karma got him.
It did. It did, and it's sad to see. Yeah, because it's
terrible when our heroes have clay feet, and it isn't just sports, politics, especially.
But
that's for another time when we don't need our blood pressure raised right now.
Well put, Ralph.
All right, my friend. Thank you very, very much on behalf of Peter Golenbock for being here. And it was like we talked out of school. We're at the university.
Good.
We'll have you back soon when Peter is here. Some sort of miscommunication. Maybe he just wanted to hear us for a change. I don't know. But look forward to your next show on the network. you're off this week, and you're going to come back next week and talk about what team you've covered.
I'm going to be off until 2 weeks from tonight. Well, actually, no. A week from Thursday, I'll be able to get together with Al and you. But I'll be out of town for starting Wednesday for a week, so I won't be available.
Go in health, and thank you again to those of you out there. I'll end the show by just saying, keep on keeping on. That's the bottom line. Life ain't always easy, but have fun.
But it is fun.
It is fun, yeah, and it's even what's happening now. You got to say it's good theater. I mean, you got to.
There's never a dull moment.
No, not at all. And so as you wake up, and it's nice to be retired, to have something to look forward to. What did he do today? Did he drop a bomb anywhere? Or did he drop an F-bomb? Even an F-bomb. And actually, he's gone 48 hours now without actually groping anybody. Now,
well, I don't know. I don't know if we can be sure.
No, that we know about, of course.
That we know about.
All right, David. Adios, everybody. We'll talk next week. See you soon.